I discovered tampons in my husband's car, and in that moment, I wished for something entirely different. I wished he had been unfaithful to me instead, so my children wouldn't have to suffer through the turmoil that was now unfolding. I am 29 years old, and I've been married to my 30-year-old husband for 7 years, 4 of those as a married couple. Never once did I have reason to doubt his commitment to me, or even to feel that our marriage was anything less than rock solid. He would joke that we were still in the honeymoon phase, even after 5 years of marriage and 2 kids. And for a long time, I never questioned that, never questioned him. Then, a surprise. It happened last month, a shock I wasn't prepared for. While I was buckling our daughter into her car seat, something caught my eye, a small object wedged between the cushions. At first, I assumed it was a forgotten toy or maybe a snack wrapper. But as I reached in, I felt it, something cylindrical. My fingers gripped it, and I instantly recognized what it was. A tampon! The confusion hit me like a wave. I pulled it out, staring at the bright wrapper, stark against the dark upholstery of the seat. This wouldn't have struck me as odd, except for one thing: I've had an IUD for over a year, which had stopped my period completely. The wrapper wasn't even a brand I recognized, and that small detail, that glaring discrepancy, made my stomach churn with unease. The pit in my stomach deepened as I wondered what this meant. I showed it to my husband later that evening, holding the tampon like a piece of evidence in a mystery that needed solving. His reaction was bewildering. At first, he didn't seem to understand what I was showing him. He stared at the tampon in my hand with an expression of genuine confusion. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked, his brow furrowed in innocent bewilderment. I took a deep breath, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I found it in your car, between the cushions. It's not mine. I haven't had a period in over a year, remember?" His face stayed blank for a moment, before realization seemed to hit him. He shrugged, and in a tone that made my blood run cold, he dismissed it. "Probably belongs to Fiona," he said nonchalantly. "She must have dropped it when we went out for lunch the other day." Just like that, he brushed it off, a casual shrug as if my finding a tampon in his car was no big deal. No apology. No concern. No acknowledgement of why I might be upset. I stood there, staring at him, desperately searching for a sign that he understood why this was bothering me. But there was nothing. His dismissive attitude was like a slap in the face, leaving me reeling, questioning everything I thought I knew about our marriage. It wasn't unusual for my husband to carpool with his coworkers, including Fiona, and I had always been comfortable with their friendship. Fiona and her husband were close friends of ours, and it was normal for them to carpool to lunch, often meeting up as couples for barbecues or movie nights. We spent weekends together, our children played together, and we shared conversations about everything from office gossip to the more personal things in life. The thought of Fiona and my husband sharing a ride to lunch had always seemed innocent. So, I tried to convince myself, maybe the tampon had just slipped out of Fiona's purse during one of these outings. Perhaps it fell out when she was digging around for her phone or wallet, unnoticed by anyone. No big deal, right? Just a small accident that could happen to anyone. I decided to put it out of my mind. After all, our friendship with Fiona and her husband was solid. There was no reason to suspect anything out of the ordinary. I reassured myself that this discovery was nothing more than a harmless mistake. But then, a couple of weeks later, we had dinner with Fiona and her husband. And the unsettling feeling started creeping back in. I really wanted to believe my husband. But something about how the tampon had been hidden in the seat, something about his reaction, just didn't sit right with me. It was almost as if he was pretending to be clueless, or worse, playing dumb. I did something I now feel a little crazy for. I faked an emergency. While we were out with Fiona, I casually asked if she had any tampons. Without missing a beat, Fiona handed me one, almost identical to the one I'd found in the car. The relief I felt in that moment was overwhelming. Maybe the tampon in the car was hers after all, and there was an innocent explanation. I convinced myself that the situation could be explained away. I thought that was the end of it, that the mystery had been solved. But then this morning, I found another tampon. This time, it was in my sock drawer. My stomach turned. The thought of my husband having an affair was enough to make me feel physically ill, but the possibility that the woman might have intentionally left these tampons for me to find? That made the nausea even worse. If it was Fiona, why would she have given herself away by offering me a tampon the other night? Under normal circumstances, I would have confronted my husband about what I had found, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was too sick, too embarrassed to even bring it up. I've spent the past few weeks contemplating the source of these tampons, and it's been tormenting me. But I felt the need to share what had happened, what I had discovered. So, I told my sister about the tampon in the car and the one in my sock drawer. I told her about my husband's cluelessness and about Fiona's tampon. We compared the tampons I had saved, except for the one from the back seat that I had discarded. They were a match, though different absorbencies. I hadn't left either of them where anyone, especially my husband or children, would have found them. My daughter didn't even know what a tampon was, let alone how it had ended up where it had. My sister was convinced it was Fiona's doing, either intentionally or unintentionally, or perhaps my husband was messing with me, but she couldn't say for sure. Neither confrontation with my husband nor with Fiona seemed like a good idea. So, she suggested something else: invite Fiona and her husband over for dinner. Had gifted our daughter without my knowledge. The shock was overwhelming. My hands shook as I gripped the phone, my mind racing in overdrive. How could this be happening? How could my husband be so careless, so deceptive? I had always trusted him, believed in the strength of our marriage. But now, the evidence was piling up, and I couldn't deny it any longer. The images from the doorbell camera replayed in my mind. There they were, walking in so casually, as though nothing was amiss. My husband, the one who had promised me nothing would come between us, was standing there, leading our daughters into the house with her, the very woman I had never expected to see again. What had she done here? What was her role in this twisted puzzle? I thought I knew my family. I thought I knew what I was walking into each day, but now everything was in question. My heart raced as I finally heard my husband's voice on the other end of the line. The numbness that had taken over me shattered when I finally spoke, demanding to know the truth. What the hell is she doing in our house? I asked, my voice thick with disbelief and fury. The words left my lips before I could stop them, and I braced myself for whatever excuse or explanation he would throw my way. The silence on the other end stretched. He had to know it was over. He had to know there was no way to talk his way out of this one. But when he finally answered, the truth came spilling out slowly, like venom from a wound that refused to heal. He told me it was his sister. His sister? The one who lived 2 states away? The one I hadn't seen in years? I could feel the blood draining from my face as the realization hit me. The tampons, the onesie, the hair clip, all of it pointed to her. The pieces were coming together, but they didn't fit in any way that made sense. How had she been involved with all of this? Why had she come here while I wasn't around? What had she been doing with my children? My thoughts spiraled into a dark, suffocating whirlwind. I had to know more. The need for answers gnawed at me like a relentless hunger. My emotions were a tangled mess of confusion, betrayal, and anger. My husband had some explaining to do. And I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. I had never expected to see her again, my sister-in-law, the one who had caused so much pain in the past, her presence now a ghost from a life I had thought was long gone. For years, I hadn't heard from her, not even a whisper. Yet here she was, standing in our home, around our children. It wasn't just the shock of her sudden reappearance after all this time, it was the stark realization of what her presence meant. She, fresh from another stint in rehab, was the absolute last person I could imagine slipping back into our lives. And yet, here she was, creeping in under the radar, like some secret that no one could confront. The weight of the situation crashed into me, heavy and suffocating. This wasn't a harmless mistake, not some misunderstood incident, it was pure betrayal. A betrayal so deep, so calculated, that I could feel its tendrils digging into everything I thought I knew about my marriage. I was beyond livid. It wasn't an affair, not exactly, but in some ways, that made it worse. Knowing who was involved, and why it had all been happening, made the situation infinitely more twisted. Apparently, she wanted to make amends, to reconnect with the people she'd hurt, and my husband was high on that list. The sheer irony stung. She tried to re-enter our lives through deceit, manipulating everything to suit her agenda. And my husband, he hadn't just let it happen, he'd been part of it. He'd been meeting her in secret, at our house, when I was away. They used the garage to sneak in, the car as shield against the watchful eyes of the front door camera. The thought of it made my skin crawl. He hadn't wanted me to know, and even when I found out, he brushed it off as if it were nothing, just a string of harmless coincidences. And all this time, I had no idea. The lies were so casual, so effortless, it made me question everything. One night, while I was away on a business trip, she spent the night, sleeping in our bed. The image of her there, in a place that should have been sacred, made me feel violated, exposed. It was as if she had claimed my space, my home, my life. She had babysat our girls one evening when I was told they were with my husband's parents. And when she dressed my youngest daughter in a onesie and bow that my husband had promised to buy for her, the emotional punch hit me square in the chest. He had promised to get those clothes himself, promised I would be the one to dress her in them. But now, my daughter was wearing them, and it felt wrong. It felt like a violation, a constant reminder of the betrayal that had been quietly building beneath the surface. Yet, when I turned to my husband, hoping for reassurance, he gave me nothing but denial. He shrugged off my concerns, telling me I was imagining things, overreacting to things that were all in my head. He dismissed every unsettling discovery, every moment that chipped away at the truth, and insisted it was nothing. He suggested, without any empathy, that I was experiencing postpartum depression, 2 years after I had given birth, as if that could explain everything. He told me I was too tired, too emotional, to see things clearly. For weeks, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. After all, he was my husband, and no other version of events made sense. But as time dragged on, my trust crumbled. The lies piled up, and with each passing day, the anger simmered inside me. It wasn't just about the lies anymore, it was about his utter disregard for me, for our family. How could he dismiss my fears so callously? How could he stand by as everything fell apart around us? I thought back to a time when my greatest fear was the possibility of facing postpartum depression, like my mother had when I was a child. The guilt that had haunted her had always terrified me, but now I feared something worse, the possibility that I was living in a world built on lies. Each new lie pushed me further away from the man I had once trusted. The anger I felt wasn't just about betrayal, it was about the realization that he had taken everything we had built and used it to hurt me. After a month of his mind-numbing chaos, I had nothing left but a well of anger, and the courage to face the truth head-on. When I confronted him, he stammered, offering half-hearted excuses that didn't make sense, each one more absurd than the last. He talked about protecting me from stress and claimed his sister just wanted to make amends. But his words were disjointed, unconvincing. I could see right through him, and his attempts to cover up the truth only deepened my fear. There was no plausible explanation for his actions. No reason I could see that could justify the depth of the deceit. When he spoke, his eyes avoided mine, and his shoulders slumped under the weight of his lies. His silence revealed more than any words ever could. The realization hit me like a cold wave. I couldn't stay with someone who had betrayed me so deeply. The thought of exposing my children to his deceitful world, to the toxic secrecy he had built, made me sick. I had to protect them. And so, with a heart full of pain and resolve, I told him it was over. His reaction was shock, pure desperation, but it didn't matter. The damage had already been done. Walking away wasn't easy. It was painful, heartbreaking even, but also empowering. It was time to take control of my life and put my children's well-being first. The divorce process was grueling. Each step was a battle. The court sessions dragged on, each one draining more of my energy as I relived the pain over and over again. My husband fought me at every turn, determined to paint himself as the victim in this mess. His stubborn refusal to accept responsibility made everything harder. In court, I laid out every painful discovery, the hidden meetings, the lies, the footage that exposed her presence in our home. I told the truth, and I backed it up with testimony from my family. But even then, it wasn't enough. The court demanded concrete proof of her character and behavior, which I struggled to obtain. But despite the obstacles, I remained focused. The heart of the matter was my husband's betrayal. Eventually, after months of legal battles, the court ruled in my favor. I was granted primary custody of our daughters, and my husband was given supervised visitation rights. The judge saw the situation for what it was: dangerous, deceitful, and toxic. In the end, I had won, but the emotional toll was immeasurable. Looking back, I learned some valuable lessons. Trust is the bedrock of any relationship, and once it's broken, it's nearly impossible to rebuild. Always trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Communication is vital. Sweeping things under the rug only makes them fester. And most importantly, never settle for less than you deserve. My children and I deserve better. We deserved a life without deceit, a life free from betrayal. And I would fight for that life, no matter what. What do you think of this story? Please leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more real-life stories.